Hello and welcome to today's webinar with Brafton and MarketMuse. The topic today we're going to be discussing is how to create in-depth content for better ranking and happier customers. Joining with me today is the Director of Marketing for Brafton. He runs all of inbound marketing, email, PPC, search at Brafton, and has been for quite some time. And he's coming to us from the Boston headquarters of Brafton, and that is Jeff Baker.
Hey, Jeff. Hey, everybody. This is Jeff Baker here with Brafton. Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to it, Jeff.
Excellent. And my name is Jeff Coyle. I'm the co-founder and chief product officer for MarketMuse. And today, when we're talking about in-depth content and creating in-depth content for content marketing success and organic search success, Jeff was the natural person that we wanted to ask to help us out to get and talk about his experience at Brafton. And then really get into the details of how he does it every day. Really usable, actionable, tactical things that have gone into kind of Brafton's transformation over the last few years. And then different ways that we like to think about, the different stages of the content creation life cycle, and how one can think about building comprehensive, empathetic content that really starts to think about the user first, think about success first, and like we mentioned in the title, creating happier user experiences. So the first question I had for Jeff today relates to kind of in his time at Brafton, how has inbound marketing changed, and how has he changed directions over the course of his time at Brafton. But before I do, I wanted to comment for the participants today, and we really appreciate you coming on to the live webinar. There will be a recording available afterwards that you can share, circulate, and we appreciate all the co-marketing and co-sharing that you provided. There's also a Q&A on the Zoom webinar. So if you have any questions as time goes along, Elizabeth and Lauren on our teams will be circulating those questions and answers for us at the end of the discussion, and we'll address as many of them as we can. So don't be shy, no matter how general or how much of a softball you want to give us. So Jeff, regarding that question related to Brafton, I want to give you some ample time to think about it. But what things have changed for you from the standpoint of inbound marketing, from the viewpoint of content marketing success?
So I think a better question would be more, what hasn't changed? And people think of content marketing and SEO as though it were in very defined stages, almost like, for 2 years this worked, and then for 3 years this worked, and then a couple more years this worked. But in reality, it was changing every single day. So when people first got into SEO, early 2000s, mid 2000s or so, there are certain tactics that worked for a certain period of time. But the search algorithms advanced at such a rate that everything that you thought was working at one time was no longer working. And as a matter of fact, down the road, what you thought was working could probably hurt you. So that brings us back to like the heyday of content marketing. Mm-hmm. So if we think of content marketing when it was really at its peak, it was probably around 2010, 2011, and you could do no wrong. Really, this was just a volume play. You would crank out as much content as humanly possible, usually 200 words, 400 words if you really wanted to get fancy. And if you looked at the analytics on any of this stuff, nobody read it. I mean, there were bots that maybe crawled your site and saw the content. However, what it did was it got you keyword results. So basically what Google had to go on was the amount of content that you're putting out there, which is like an authority signal, and the amount of times you would write pieces of content that had a target keyword that linked back to certain core landing pages. So over a period of time, if you pumped out tons of content, you were sending these signals to Google that says, this page is of value, therefore you should give this authority for the keyword that we're targeting. And that worked. That worked really, really well. You saw content marketing blow up. Anybody could write, and everybody was experiencing success. Flash forward a couple years from there, what used to work then actually started hurting you. So we realized in a hurry that you can't just write content for the sake of content anymore.
And you're primarily covering many of the algorithm changes that focused on comprehensiveness and quality, and really got into the meaning behind the words.
Panda 1 through 9, Hummingbird, all that stuff. Yeah, exactly. So it got to a point where it wasn't about just what you told Google in the metadata. Google was able to get in there and is actually able to extract the meaning of the content and whether or not you were doing a good job of satisfying the intent of whatever it was somebody was searching. So basically, it's able to get in there and without the actual keywords that somebody's searching in, they're going to know semantically, based on other words that you've used, what you're talking about and what keywords you should probably rank for, because you're going to satisfy the intent of somebody that's searching a related keyword. So
so like you mentioned at Brafton, what was the legacy situation, in that time period, and how did that change? And I think that some people at this point in the journey for content marketing have said, if you had been focused on comprehensive content and writing great subject matter materials in that pre-2011 zone, you're reaping the benefits now. Was Brafton in that position, or were they someone that did they have to like kind of migrate and change?
I don't know any agency or anybody that was in that position. I didn't work with anybody that, and we're talking of that heyday. We're talking at the peak of content marketing volume production, 2011. I don't know of anybody that was saying, write long, comprehensive 1,500 word pieces at that point. You got to remember, Hummingbird hadn't even come out yet. And we're still, we have the luxury of hindsight at this point where we know everything that we did wrong. At that time, all we knew was write lots of content and you rank for keywords. So I'd say by the time Panda came out and you started seeing some penalties roll through, and you start seeing some clients that were ranking, getting some angry phone calls like, hey, we were on the first page a week ago and now we just got booted to page 3. What's going on? That's when we go, okay, the market has changed. So the product that used to work very, very well needs to evolve because, hey, they pulled the rug out from under us. It's like I said, this is on a spectrum, and every single day was changing. Some days were huge changes, but it's still evolving every single day, and that was a big evolution.
Nice, yeah, and so when you mention the product, you mean a delivered content plan or a delivered kind of package of content that they were publishing on their site?
So it was a lot more. Yeah, good question. So in this time, it was a lot more content heavy. So there was not a whole lot of, sure, there was infographics, there was videos, but there wasn't a whole lot of embedded media within content. It was just short news-based articles.
Gotcha.
So with that said, it wasn't even very much evergreen content. It was very news-based, just getting content out there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah. So pivoting, to the topic today, content depth. So when we speak about content depth, we're talking about things like comprehensiveness, exhibiting the signals that a subject matter expert would exhibit if they were covering a topic, really telling the story of meeting searcher intent, and allowing them to accomplish their tasks and be successful. When they type a query, you have the content collection or the content item that meets their needs. And so in the pre-writing phase, so prior to hitting a keystroke or starting putting pen to paper, how today at Brafton is the goal of having comprehensive, great content impacting that research process? So
before we even get to the briefing process, so you mentioned first keystroke, right? Well, before we even do the first keystroke for prepping a writer, there's a ton of work. And I would argue probably the most important work goes into topic selection.
Have to agree.
And very, very robust keyword research. And honestly, I can talk to you a little bit about our keyword research, but there's no faster way to get a bunch of SEOs in an argument than to say, what's the right way to do
that's what we're here for. Come on.
Yeah, right. So before we even write any sort of brief to prep a writer on anything, we do really, really in-depth keyword research. We'll break it into 4 different phases. So the first phase is we're going to evaluate and we're not even looking at numbers yet, but we're going to evaluate keywords that our competitors rank for that we do not rank for. So that's one bucket. We're going to take another one of keywords that they're bidding on, PPC. So that would be like high commercial intent types of queries for landing page considerations, probably. So that's another bucket. Third bucket is what keywords do our competitors not rank for and we don't rank for. So I would consider this, I'd call this like a white space area. So where is there opportunity that everybody's missed? And then finally, the fourth phase is what content have you already written that you can optimize and stand to gain additional results from?
And as part of that process, are you doing things like content inventory, content auditing to evaluate that? Or is it primarily focused on kind of keyword management or things like that?
Yeah, we're constantly doing content auditing. So we've got a good sense of it. But in short, what we're doing is we're looking at, we'll take the first group. So the first group that I mentioned is what are the keywords that our competitors are ranking for that we're not ranking for. So we'll take people in our space. They aren't necessarily business competitors, but in all essence, they are digital competitors. If they own the keywords that we want to rank for, they're a competitor. Plain and simple. You're a competitor. You're taking eyeballs off of my site, therefore you're my competitor. So we're evaluating these websites and seeing what they're ranking for and what we're not ranking for. So we'll take a list of these and we'll put them through, this is like a two-person process. We'll put them through a battery of tests. We'll run them through a few different keyword tools. We'll look at search volumes and compare across Hrefs, SEMrush, sometimes Moz, and we'll gauge like what the kind of search volume is. And then we'll put a lot of emphasis into what the organic keyword difficulty is. And we've done a very, very extensive study where we know just about what our threshold is for us to rank on page one. So we've actually done a research project where we've drawn correlations between keywords that we've targeted and where we've ranked for with those keywords. And we have a pretty good understanding of exactly which keyword difficulty score we need to target and under. So,
and so when you say keyword difficulty, just for people that may use various sets of tools, are you using a combination of third-party keyword difficulty metrics? At MarketMuse, we built our own metric that uses content quality as well as competitor content quality to influence keyword difficulty. It's releasing with our upcoming MarketMuse Suite launch. But which offerings are you using today, and what are the core elements of difficulty that you're using to influence that process?
Generally, and yeah, for the audience that isn't completely familiar with this, I'll back up a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
So keyword difficulty, in essence, it evaluates the competitive landscape, the organic competitive landscape for anyone that ranks for a keyword. So if I were to type in industrial Ethernet solutions or something as obscure as that, you could take a look at the top 20 results for that particular keyword, and you could evaluate the relative strength of each one of the pages and the domains that rank for that particular keyword. You map yourself across to those domains. You say, okay, I've got a domain authority of 50. This is a very simplistic view. And my competitors have a domain authority of 30. Therefore, very quick math tells you that you are, on average, a stronger website than anybody that's ranking for that keyword. So that would be a good target.
So that's referenced as in the industry does kind of domain level or site level competitive cohort profiling. So you're saying I am here, they're there. That gives me a higher than random chance of doing well in this situation. Is that fair?
And I think higher than random is probably a good way to put it. It's not a black and white. I'm a 55. The average is a 40. I'm going to rank. There's so much more that goes in.
Yeah.
But it is a pretty good starting point. And our numbers show that it actually is
no, that's great.
Helpful in choosing topics.
That's great.
So generally we use Moz and SEMrush. We'll evaluate keyword difficulty scores to choose keywords.
Excellent. Yeah, that's where we were talking about some ways that we're looking at actual content on the pages to add value to those types of metrics, which is something we'll talk about in a future webinar, actually. So yeah, so getting back to this, so in that research process, you've identified the groups. I think you mentioned you had kind of competitive gaps, PPC targets, competitor white space where there's nobody touching it,
Yeah.
and then situations where they have existing content that's had different degrees of success. As far as how does the next step go from that? Is it looking for low hanging fruit? Is it kind of taking guidance from the customer and saying these are the topics I care about? How do you decide at that point?
I think we generally decide based on opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to take a look at all of these. And generally, we start off with very, very large keyword lists. And we're just going to cross-reference all the different numbers and look for the optimal combination of difficulty scores, search volume, SERP crowding, all that kind of stuff to figure out like which keywords have the very most opportunity. And usually we're going to start with a combination of, like, on a monthly basis, you're going to want to produce some new thoughts, some new ideas. So we're going to choose some new keywords that we're not ranking for. But at the same time, we're going to take old content that stands a chance of ranking better than it currently is. So a good example of that would be we rank for a keyword that says, what is a subdomain? And we're ranking at the top of the second page. We're ranking number 11, 12, something like that. And excuse me, we realize that the search volume on that is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 800. And you know that the click-through rate on page 2 is going to vary somewhere between 0.5 and 0.5%. So between 0.5 and 0.8% of, we'll say, 800 searches is going to be just a handful of visitors per month. So if you're to take that page, which is a known quantity, you know that you're already almost ranking well for a very, very good high intent keyword. If you're able to bump up that click-through rate up to about 10%, you've multiplied your traffic by a compound of 10. So we're going to take that because we recognize that as a very distinct opportunity, a very easy opportunity to take that blog post and rewrite it with more depth and more topic coverage with the intent of ranking higher for that blog post.
And so how do you approach the situation where we've identified the topic and you're looking to kind of get to that next phase? What does depth mean in that context? How do I drive the content creation in that situation? Because identifying the right topics is rule number one, right? That's how you build your plans. That's how you drive, connecting the dots between 5 pages I need to update, 6 pages I need to create. They're all about the same topic. How do I take that next step and get into the research process to say
briefing?
Yeah, the briefing, right?
Yeah, gotcha. So from that point, and I'll back up a little bit because this is an area that I ran into that had a lot of issues with this. The first time I came up with a very rough content brief, and what I mean by content brief is once you select a topic, writing up an outline of what the content should look like, what the title should look like, what types of things you should talk about. About 3 years back, we'd select topics, and I knew that you had to, as opposed to writing a blog post where you just try to include the keywords that you want to rank for into the blog post, I knew that you had to write a blog post that fully supported that keyword. So it didn't even necessarily mean using that keyword. It meant creating basically a robust resource center that answers every single question somebody would want to know answers to about that specific keyword. Then you're going to rank for that keyword. So with that in mind, there was no software at the time. So it was just a matter of intuition. So picking a keyword and saying, okay, what are the things that I would want to know when searching this keyword? And listing those out just in bullet points and saying, could you please cover all of these topics when writing this post?
So it felt like a keyword list often that you were handing off to a writer, and in some degree, sometimes that felt good to the writer, sometimes that didn't. Didn't really coach them much at the early stages when we were delivering word lists. Is that accurate? And that was my experience in 10 years ago as well.
There's not enough context to it, really.
Exactly
and once you're reading off a list of bullet points, you're like, all right, well, I'll just include these bullet points. But it's not really about that. And fortunately, I was approached by one of your colleagues a year ago saying, hey, we've got software that does this kind of thing for you. I said, well, okay, well, explain to me like how you can do something with software that I can do on my own. And basically walked me through how, and I'm going to simplify this as much as possible for the audience, and you can get as in depth as you want because I'm not going to be able to, is go through those, like I mentioned, go through those top 20 results and take note of all of the topics that they talk about. So if we bring up our, our previous example of industrial Ethernet solutions, go through each of the 20 results and say what topics are they talking about in each one of those results, topic A through topic D, right? And you can see that there are in each one of those results, certain people cover topics A and B, some of them D and E, some of them F and A. It doesn't really matter, but you can, at the end, you will have an entire blueprint of everything that's been talked about by everybody that ranks for that particular keyword. So you've got basically the ultimate blueprint for how to write the most comprehensive piece of content on the web. And not only that, you actually know which topics were emphasized more than others. Right. So topic B came up 16 times out of 20. So you better cover topic B really, really well.
So we compare that as something like a table stakes. Everybody's doing it. If you have the same intent with your site, with that content item, then, and you were an expert, you likely would have covered that comprehensive. You likely would have hit that. And if you find something that nobody has, but it's still relevant to your business, well, then that's a great opportunity for differentiation. So those two dynamics, I think, happen a lot with this type of research. Is that fair?
Yeah, definitely. And that exact thing that you just talked about is really good for taking old content that's not ranking and running it through your tool, which is going to identify those topic gaps.
Gotcha.
So we'll run it through the tool and it'll say, okay, you've covered 60% of the entire landscape of topics you can talk about for a particular keyword. And the gaps that you missed that other people are talking about that you aren't are something that everybody's talking about and you completely missed it. So there's a big opportunity to, make your piece of content more comprehensive.
So what's been the experience when you hand that type of briefing to a writer and, having them be able to digest it? When you're, before there was data-backed solutions that were out there, a lot of times people got large keyword lists in a spreadsheet or not in a spreadsheet, and they were just dumping them on the writers. And the writers are subject matter experts. They get paid to write. They're people you care about. If you're not hugging your writers, I don't know why. And you really need to be thinking, empathetically, putting yourself in their shoes of what makes them tick and what makes them want to do this job. How do you tactically give, this type of guidance to a writer and have it be impactful and have them want to do it? What are the steps that you've taken at Brapton internally to make that successful? And also in cases where you're giving advice to clients? Yeah.
Well, at first, it didn't work. At first, it was my fault. I created bad briefs. And essentially the briefs.
Bad briefs. I love it. Yes.
I created Yeah, I did. I created really bad briefs. So a couple ways it went wrong. The first way it went wrong was I created a brief of a keyword that I wanted to rank for. And I listed all of those relevant topics that everybody's talking about as like a bullet point form. And I didn't say talk about each one of these topics in context of the keyword and the intent. I just said cover these topics. And really, if you read it that way, that just means use these topics as they are.
Right.
Almost like keywords. Use these keywords within this keyword topic exactly as they are.
Right.
And that doesn't work because that just comes back around to keyword stuffing topics instead of just, actually writing to it. So the challenge that we found was that we had to contextualize all of this stuff. So when writing a brief and you find all of these related topics, you have to write it out as, okay, this is what it really means. So when you find this related topic in the context of this keyword, this is what people are talking about. So going back to our, and this was an actual client example, industrial Ethernet solutions. So it could be, one of the related topics could be software.
Mhm.
And you can't just put software in a brief and expect
Right.
everybody to understand what you're talking about. You have to say software relevant to industrial Ethernet solutions in the bottling space, or
Right.
whatever it is. Just be really, really specific so that they have proper guidance on what to write. And once we did that, that was much more helpful.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really appropriate message. And it's just to reiterate, it's that some things in topic-based research are going to be less specific, like software, or they might be more specific, like, bottling technologies or something like that. And it's important to have both of those things. It's important to have these more generic concepts, because if you're writing great content about industrial Ethernet solutions and you don't mention software at all, there's something weird there, right? So people are so trained on the keyword lists that when they see that, they're like, well, I'm not trying to rank for software. And you're like, no, you're not. You're trying to make sure that you're building great content, and great content about this includes that. So it's like, it's retraining your brain on the fact that volume shouldn't be the only driver of the way you think. It's really about context. It's really about value. So I thought that was really well stated there. So.
Yeah, and that's a very good point that you just noted. It is not about volume, and we've done studies on that as well, trying to draw correlations between word count and keyword rankings, and there is none. There is no statistically relevant correlation between the two things. It's how well you cover the specific topics that need to be talked about. So just to round off that point there, and some of the feedback that I've had from writers, it's, to your point, you can't just hand a writer keyword research to do. Hey, that's not being a good friend or a good colleague. Like, hey, do the keyword research, then write about this. That's not very helpful. So the ways that we can be helpful is creating these briefs with context around each one of these topics, so that it gives more guidance, where you could, if you're writing every single day, it's not easy for them to just, take a topic and say, all right, what am I going to talk about for the rest of this blog post? This is going to be a 1,000-word blog post. This kind of gives subtle cues as to some of the things that you could discuss to make it more robust. So the feedback that I've had is that, like, when you run into that point where, okay, what do I talk about next? It's like, okay, great. Here is another topic that I can talk about, and here's the context in which I should talk about it.
No, I think that that's right on. So, the way I like to think about it, and we'll get into the kind of the depth execution and assessment process, is the more guidance we're able to give, the more creative you're going to be. I'm maybe not very creative, because if I'm the search person building a brief, but if I want you to spend more of your brain cycles being creative, worrying about tone and voice, and really delivering something that approaches this topic with an angle that's going to be interesting. Maybe my goal is via, social traffic even to get, or maybe this is something that's going to be going to an email audience as well through a different channel. So what I would like to do is enable writers always to be able to be more creative while attacking and successfully achieving the goals of the brief. So I think that that's really nicely stated. As far as, you mentioned competitive analysis as a core of your your decision-making process, what to write about. How much is competitive analysis, how impactful is that as you write, or when you're evaluating a draft when it's been handed in to your copy editor or something like that? Are they still doing ongoing competitive analysis to do checks and balances or head-to-head analysis?
Typically, what we're doing, we're doing that beforehand. So when we're in the topic selection, the keyword research selection process, my colleague Lauren and I are actually going through. That's another part of the process. Once we actually select a keyword that we think is relevant to us, and we have determined that there's a lot of opportunity there based on all the metrics that we talked about, we'll manually go through each of the top 10 to 20 results and just eyeball it and say, all right, what is it that these people are talking about? Like, what is the intent behind it?
Why are they there?
Why are they there? Why are these 20 there? Yeah, that's very well stated. Why are these results there? And sometimes we'll see stuff and it'll be like, all right, this is way, way out of our space. And I don't know why this popped up on the list. So we're not going to even consider it. And then other times we'll see stuff that's, super relevant to our industry. Neil Patel is there, Maz is there. All of the major heavy hitters are there. Mm-hmm. And we'll take a look at what they're writing and the angles that they're taking, and we'll incorporate that into the brief. So at that point, that's about as far as we go with the competitive research. Aside from once the writer writes something, we'll rerun it through MarketMuse and we'll see if we have any gaps, because it is changing. So we could write a brief usually about 3 weeks out. And then by the time it actually gets written, the landscape has changed and there are new players in the landscape. There's new topics in the landscape. Yep. So sometimes we'll find that your software will update real time, because it is updating real time, right? Like you're scraping new results, right? So you're scraping new results, and we've got new players in the field, and we've got new topics. So we'll find that, although we covered all the topics that we previously put into the brief, there are now 3 more topics that we missed, and we now have gaps in something that we just wrote, and it's only been a month. So we'll go back and say, hey, please identify these topics within the content with this context, like we talked about.
Well, you've actually mentioned something that's a little bit kind of inside baseball, but understanding the velocity of content that's being produced in a topic is part of the battle. So if their query deserves freshness, so if there's fresh results happening all the time in a SERP landscape, a search engine results page landscape, if there's no content that's been built in a long time, if nothing's changed for a long time, those are all really important factors in evaluating the competition and evaluating the quality of content in the competitive landscape. So like you kind of naturally mentioned it, that is this changing? It's also, does this ever change? Because that can impact how successful your content plan can be or will be based on who your client is or who you are if you're an in-house. So that was, really, really nice. You had mentioned as part of planning, updating content's important. A lot of people are keeping it up to date. Yeah, obviously you want to keep it up to date, but outside of just the goal of keeping something out to date, in the briefing process, are you detailing how often you want to update this, or is that something you're doing kind of in the rear view based on success, or both?
We're doing it based on success, and I'm living out of Google Analytics, so I'm looking at for a couple things: where we're ranking, the amount of traffic that we're getting to a particular piece of content, and then based on that, if it fits those criteria of driving traffic and still being relevant, we'll take a look at it. And we'll decide to re-optimize it. So a good example here was, it's a different one. So it was a best newsletters in class. So we were optimizing for the best newsletters that we could find on the web that were writing. And this was dated back to 2016. So while that was still getting traffic, it was late. It was old and it wasn't fresh. So we saw an opportunity to update that for the most recent results on the web. So you get a couple things here. You update it with more in-depth content by identifying the gaps, and you also update the actual content within the piece. So you get very, very fresh results. And in these instances where we do this with the old, and I can't emphasize this enough, taking old blog posts and old content and re-optimizing it, we see immediate results from that. So something that's been indexed for a while that you rewrite, you publish with a new published date, and do a fetch as Google, we see immediate results. So we've seen blog posts go from 32 to 4 in as fast as it takes you to re-index it. We've seen them go from 3 to 1. And that's actually what we got published on Moz. Was I got lucky that it happened to end up at 1, because some of them end up at 3 and some of them end up at 7.
Not as exciting, but
this one, I basically did a screenshot of, here's an old blog post that our one of our old colleagues wrote, and then our main writer Mike rewrote it, and we just republished the content that day. We did a fetch as Google, so it got immediately force indexed into the system. And the amount of time it took me to go from Search Console over to an incognito window and research it went from 3 to 1.
Right.
And if you, so by the way, worked really nicely for me to write an article on.
Well, if you look for Moz, MarketMuse, Jeff Baker, you'll find that piece. So yeah. No, that's an awesome point. And I think that there's some other components that you've mentioned to me. You mentioned earlier on in the discussion related to, if something was news, if something was short, how are you expanding it? How are you making it more robust? If it was, 400 words, but it's doing decently, what are you expanding? Are you expanding it to be more evergreen, which meaning it'll last the test of time? It's background or information. It's awareness phase content. It's consideration phase content. Or are you expanding it to attack one user intent that you really care about? People buying trail running shoes, and you're really focusing on them. The other piece that I think you mentioned, which I thought was really important to note, was, what words did this page rank for that maybe I didn't explicitly target, but this page is doing well? Well, how do I take that and take next steps? Do I update this page, or do I start to create new pages in my, in that little content cluster to see if they'll be as successful? So I think that those are ways that you can update content and parlay updating content with creating new content, creating those new briefs and have a lot of success quickly. So I think that, that works really well. It works really well for, all types of content, whether it's news where you're adding background or information, whether it's product information where you're adding use cases, any types of content under the sun. So I thought that was really great. So, what's the competitive advantage? You've described a lot of detail, and I find that your team has a few competitive advantages. And one of them's in the keyword research process. One of them's in the briefing process. Not everybody's delivering comprehensive briefs that really speaks to angles, really speaks to context for writers that aren't just keyword lists. Outside of the things you mentioned already, are there any other components that give you a competitive edge that you're willing to share?
As far as like a competitive edge,
Yeah.
I think people overestimate the knowledge in the SEO. I don't want to insult any SEOs out there, but however, there is a big knowledge gap out there right now, as it relates to SEO and actual results that you see. And a lot of the clients that we work with are working directly with SEO agencies.
Right.
And it's remarkable how many of them are behind the times.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't expect clients go to SEO agencies, they go to content marketing agencies so that they can fill that knowledge gap.
Right.
So whatever the SEO agency or the content marketing agency tells them is going to be what they believe. And unfortunately, a lot of the SEO agencies are behind the times, and I'm not going to say willfully, but they don't practice this type of in-depth content.
Right.
So we will see that SEO agencies are giving bad advice, and they're not advising their clients to write in-depth content to rank for keywords. Typically, what we're seeing is the SEO agencies come in and say, "We're going to do on-page optimization." That is classic SEO 101, on-page optimization all day long. And yeah, that is SEO. However, that is, as far as weighting and whether or not you're actually going to see the results of it, that's becoming increasingly smaller. That's a smaller weight when it comes to actually realizing results. So I think the competitive edge that we have is that we see the value in writing very, very in-depth, good content and the results that you get from it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I think it's just, all the processes that we talked about are important, yes, but just the realization and being able to convey this knowledge to our clients and to say, hey, this is what it's all about now, does give us a competitive advantage where a lot of the market isn't having those conversations, unfortunately, or depending on how you want to.
Yeah, are you discussing content strategy, whether you're a publisher, an in-house, B2B tech company, or an e-commerce company? Are you discussing content strategy with your search engine marketing, resources? If not, then that's something to be thinking about. Yeah. Also, how adaptable are you able to be to your writing resources? I find that that's really important. So, if frankly you can't update a page because maybe it converts too much and you're frightened to, or it just doesn't work. It won't work to update this page. What do you do? And if if the people you're working with aren't giving you clear guidance on how to take a different pivot, and it's maybe only one way, those are things to be concerned about. So I thought that was really, really great. Great. We've had 3 questions come in, and so really, really good ones, I thought. One is, how does, that's a great question. How does this have an impact on homepage optimization?
Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah. All right. Actually, I've got a scientific case study for you to answer that one. We ranked without any targeting for the homepage. I'm talking about Brafton.com.
Right.
We've done stuff for clients as well, but in this particular study, without any targeting whatsoever. So I mean, no title tag work, no on-page optimization. We ranked for the keyword content marketing agency in position 16. We did everything that a classical SEO agency would do with on-page optimization. So we did, title tags, alt text, H1s through H6, all that kind of just on-page checking all of our boxes. We went from 16 to anywhere between 11 to 12 on any given day. So nice modest increase. That's what you would expect from on-page optimization. However, like we talked about before, the difference between moving from the bottom of page 2 to the top of page 2 is the incremental difference is nothing. It's page one bust. So we wrote in-depth content for the home page. We actually went from about 300 words to maybe about 800 words, and we created a whole bunch of really nice visuals to accommodate that text. And over a period of about 2 months, we moved from 11 to 2. So we sit pretty permanently at 2 now. So the weighting here is what I was alluding to earlier with the on-page SEO is what you're going to see from most agencies. They're going to deliver that, and you're going to see incremental gains because that is still a factor. However, that in-depth content is what really made that incremental boost from 11 to 2.
Nice.
And we had the initial boost. I'll just finish off on that point. We had the initial boost, but it went from 11 to 6 almost immediately. And then it kind of, a lot of the questions we got were, well, freshness is fresh content. Quality deserves deserves quality, QDR.
Quality deserves freshness.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
We saw that initial boost and people were like, well, is it going to stay there? As a matter of fact, it moved up. So it went from 6 to 2. So now it's actually pretty solid at 2. So when we do re-optimize content, not just for the homepage, it tends to move up in rankings and then continue to slide up in rankings. We generally never see it slide back down.
No, that's very important. It's that after a few months, that has the opportunity to continue to grow. The way that, I think in your case, that example, it's because that's what you were. That's what Brafton is. They're a content marketing agency. So if you have the inventory to support this, that you deserve to perform in these zones, in these topics, then you can take something like a homepage, or you can take something that's a powerful landing page and do really well. A lot of times in these industries, you see maybe short length landing pages doing really well. It's guess what? They're bolstered by a massive inventory. So if you ever go in, you're like, hey, they're telling us to write long form content, but this landing page is ranking. Well, guess what? Behind the scenes, there's probably a lot of links and there's a lot of long form content as kind of a supporting foundation for these topics. In your case, your entire site tells the story that you are that content marketing agency. So your homepage is just punching it home. And I think that's a really important response. And a similar question from another anonymous user is how about product pages?
Oh yeah, same exact thing too. So we took existing product pages, but we also mainly created new product pages, and we did it across all of the different products that we cover: infographics, white papers, ebooks, all that stuff. And for the new content that we created, we did the same thing. We wrote very in-depth content that's going to satisfy the full intent of a visitor, with that in mind first, after choosing the keywords, of course. And we saw very modest gains at first. We saw most of our core landing pages ranking somewhere on page 2, page 3. And then over the past year, most of these went in place about a year ago or so. We now have 22 of our 37 keywords that we've targeted ranking on page 1. So it actually drives a total of, where we were driving 0 traffic before, all of our targeted, and these are all commercial intent keywords. People that have their checkbook on their laptop looking for services and to compare vendors. We drive about 660 high intent visitors per month that wasn't otherwise there. So it took time, but eventually that came around. And the value over replacement is what I'd call it. So us ranking organically for those keywords, we would have to pay a fortune in PPC to get that type of result.
No, I think that's key. And there's another question about, do you ever worry about cannibalization between product pages and some of the other content that you're creating? And I think, my answer to that is that you really need to be thinking about your entire site as being your guide to everything you've written. So when you're looking at category pages or your product pages or content that you're writing to speak to a particular person I'm assuming this person is talking about an e-commerce site, in this particular stage of the buy cycle, you're watching the results in analytics. You can pivot and you can change things up if you're feeling if you feel like you're not landing the person on the right page. But doing that after the fact is appropriate. But really, do your pages give the reader who might land on them enough information to say, yes, they have product pages that are connected to this. Yes, they have guides. Yes, they have questions and answers. So I like to always think, is this landing page that might be a product page, it might be a category page, or it might be a long form content guide. Is it telling the story about where I can go next? And I think if you do that very well, you can limit some of the impacts of maybe sending someone to the inappropriately intent-focused page, or to a page that might not convert as well. And again, great problem to have. Also, it's because you can pivot, you can change look and feel, and do things like that. But I know we're coming up close, and we've got a couple other questions. But I thought these were awesome questions. I love the last one about worrying about cannibalization between high conversion rate optimization, focused page values, and not. I think that's something that we focus on with a lot of our e-commerce clients. How did you essentially justify the value of pivoting at Brafton? I thought this was an awesome question from to the senior management. Was it something that they just like, yes, go for it, or was it something that took a little bit of time? And obviously we only got a couple of minutes, but how did you kind of put together that business case to make the changes that you discussed?
Well, I mean, we had to experiment first, so I couldn't go in blind. We had to do a little bit of experimenting with a couple pages here and a couple pages there. Fortunately, in order to justify this, we started with a homepage. So there isn't much better justification than going from 16 to 2 for our highest intent keyword, our highest converting likely.
Right.
Keyword. So it really doesn't take a whole lot of justification after that. And then since we've refined the process, we started to see some modest gains. And then over the past 3 or 4 months, we put together a really strong campaign when we had full buy-in to target this massive list of specific keywords. And the results of that were really astounding. Like the number of keywords that we ranked for doubled within 3 months. So we went from 8,000 keywords that we ranked for as a domain to just over 16,000. And the number of keywords ranking 1 through 3, includes targeted keywords and variant keywords, from about, I think 60 to 240 or so. So like, yeah, that initial foot in the door with the homepage, we fully embraced. Yeah, we need to write really good in-depth content. And we saw some of the results from that. That's when we really ramped up and we started moving into product pages. Those started seeing those results. Then we said, okay, now it's worthy of investing in blog posts. That's a big question. And it's sometimes a tough pill to swallow when you're trying to talk to clients about, should we invest in a whole briefing process? Should we write content that's typically a lot longer than it would normally be? Well, we got to a point where we started seeing the results, and the answer is yes, you should do that because that's what it takes now. Google requires really good content. Most content does not perform. It's going to sit on page 2 and page 3 and never see any results. So
over 90% of the content.
Over 90%, that's right. Yeah, I saw that.
Has no chance of performing from the day it's published, and that scares us. You have to beat those numbers. You have to put yourself in the best possible position that you can, and doing the things you talked about really, put us in. And I like just to summarize what you had said on proving the case for senior executives. I think thinking about your head topics. your marquee things that make a difference that people are thinking about at the executive, level, like topics they want to perform well for, or money words, right? Things that are going to produce direct revenue, and having directional improvement there, while at the same time fattening up that middle, that big term pool. Everything that you are about or want to be about, are you doing directionally better? Are you ranking for more things, as well as having directional improvement on the head? That's a great 1-2 punch for making the case to a senior executive, for sure. So that was, what you described is how you made the case internally. We're about to wrap, but I did have a question about, are there good examples of content briefs? There are. I'll make sure that in the follow-up that we link to the Moz article that Jeff referenced in the follow-up to this, as well as we'll put some links to content brief examples as well, various types, both a create as well as for creating a new content item. And then Jeff, if you wanted to give a screenshot of parts of one, feel free to do that. And we can also include that.
Yeah, we've got a few examples.
But I wanted to just wrap it up with we had a number of questions, and if I didn't get to all of them, we really appreciate it, and that's something I'll talk to Jeff, and we'll try to communicate via email. I think something that says empowering creativity was something that was said on this discussion that really resonated with a viewer today. What's a good example of how that's manifested? And Jeff, do you have any good examples of that? It's kind of like making somebody more successful.
It's taking the weight of coming up with doing everything. Where when you first start, a lot of times in-house companies, agencies will just give a topic to a writer and say, okay, good luck, go for it. And I think taking some of the burden off of doing keyword research for one, trying to figure out what all the topics they should talk about for two, really frees them up to be like, all right, now I know I can just elaborate on these topics, and I can really let my voice shine. And I can worry about the style and the tone more than figuring out what to write about.
Yep.
Really, I think that empowers them to be more creative. It gives them the space to okay, here's the range of things that I can talk about. Let me color it in. Let me put the color in there.
Perfectly said. Let your writers write. Let your writers exhibit their subject matter expertise. Let your non-writers who you're leaning on to be subject matter experts have a chance to execute something that's going to perform. And I think you'll have a lot more success. So that was a great question as well. And we appreciate all the questions. Jeff, last word before we close up. And I really appreciate your time today. And I think that this has been an extremely valuable discussion. Anyone getting started in a research briefing, really thinking about building great content, comprehensive content, and doing that all the time. But any last words?
No, anybody has any questions? We love talking about this stuff. Send me a note. We'll send out, I believe we'll send out contact information out. Okay, there it is. Yeah, you'll have that available. If you have any questions about any of this stuff, any of the experiments that we've run, feel free to contact us. If you want good content written, Rafton writes good content. We throw a little plug in there at the end.
Plugs are excellent. We'll get a plug song pretty soon.
Other than that, if you just want to talk SEO, give me a call.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jeff, again, and everyone for showing up and participating with us. Any questions? Really, really, really love hearing from you. And I'm always available. Twitter, I respond to almost everything, or email as well as Jeff. Usually it'll be too long, but we will respond and have any conversations you want to have about any of these topics and more. So really appreciate it. And thank you so much for joining us. And look for the webinar replay, a few of the show notes that we talked about in the coming days. Thanks again. And we appreciate y'all. Thank you.